Hey everybody, it's Vigilus. Now this is my second video on this channel, and I'm going to try and keep as consistent an upload schedule as I can. My goal is to upload one video every Friday, if not more often, but that may not always go through. So all I ask is that you bear with me and know that videos are coming. Most of the content that I hope to make will be largely serious videos, responding to current events and to ideas that I think need to be talked about. And in order to make that good, it requires a lot of researching and fact-checking. When I make a video like that, I want it to be as crisp and airtight as it can possibly be. And so for that reason, it's going to take a little longer to do than the shorter, sillier videos. And I will do some silly videos because I want to have some fun on this channel. But I don't want this channel to be overly silly. At the same time, I don't want to be so dull and dry all the time that nobody wants to listen. As always, with all of my videos, I ask you, the viewer, to leave me your honest feedback on what you think. If you like it, give it a like. If you don't like it, leave a dislike. Tell me what you think I can do better. Tell me what you think of my ideas. Tell me if there's something that I missed. If presented with solid evidence that contradicts something that I think, I am more than willing to change my stance. This channel is not about me pushing my ideas down your throat. My goal with all of the content that I present is to make you think and to spark a conversation that we can all engage in a quest for truth. Now in this video I'm going to be discussing net neutrality, and specifically I'm going to be dissecting an interview that was done with FCC Chairman Ajit, a former Verizon lawyer who's trying to remove Title II protections from the internet. Now, most of the people I've heard talk about this seem to support Title II protections. However, there seem to be a significant number of people who think that we lose nothing by reclassifying the internet under Title I, and that the government is doing the right thing to relinquish regulatory power over the internet. Because government getting out of the way is a good thing, right? Well, normally yes. In fact, in 99 out of 100 cases, I would say that the best thing that regulators can do is to get out of the way of a good thing. I lean right of center, and I despise government overreach as much as any of you. But, with that said, I don't think that the current Title II classification is a case of such overreach. And in fact, I submit that Pi's proposal will actually increase overregulation and congestion of the internet. Not specifically from the government, but from private companies who stand to gain from an internet not protected by a Title II classification. Let's take a look.
FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai joins me now. Welcome to the NewsHour.
Thank you for having me.
So you, I understand, are not a fan of these net neutrality rules from a few years ago. What is your principal concern?
Well, I favor a free and open internet, as I think most consumers do. My concern is with the particular regulations that the FCC adopted 2 years ago. They are what is called Title II regulations, developed in the 1930s to regulate the Ma Bell telephone monopoly.
Except that's not all that the Act did. It gave the federal government the ability to oversee and regulate the expansion of interstate commerce as it related to wireless and radio communications. Pi also implies that the Act is outdated and out of its league in trying to regulate the internet. And it would be if not for the Telecommunications Act of 1996, which provided modern definitions and rules about how to handle things like the internet. Next, we'll get into the arguments about infrastructure, and this is where we start to see some serious holes in his arguments. Listen to this.
And my concern is that by imposing those heavy-handed economic regulations on internet service providers, big and small, we could end up disincentivizing companies from wanting to build out internet access to a lot of parts of the country, low-income, urban, and rural areas, for example. And that, I think, is something that nobody would benefit from.
There's no evidence of that. Infrastructure investment on the part of ISPs has in fact not been harmed by the reclassification of the internet as a telecommunications service. CEOs of Verizon and AT&T are informing their investors that business is in fact booming, and that they will continue to invest in infrastructure. This makes sense for two reasons. One, because every internet company wants a bigger slice of the pie. They're going to continue to try and expand their networks to reach more users. But the second reason that this makes sense is because even if they don't get more users, their existing users are going to continue to consume more data, which means an increasing load on their networks, regardless of new customers. So in the first case, ISPs will expand in order to reach new people, and in the second case, ISPs will have to expand in order to support the customers that they already have. He brings the same point up again later, but we'll get to that soon.
Is there evidence, though, that these rules have disincentivized those companies? I mean, their businesses are doing very well. They're spending billions on the spectrum.
There is significant evidence that investment in infrastructure has gone down since the adoption of these rules. For example, there's a study by a highly respected economist that says that among the top 12 internet service providers in terms of size, investment is down by 5.6%, or several $billion over the last 2 years.
What?
Whoa. Back up. To which highly respected economist are you referring? What was the name of this study? You knew what questions you'd be asked before you got in here. Would it really have been that difficult to prepare some proper backing, like a name or the name of a study? He just played the arguing from power fallacy, where someone says, I have an important title that means I'm smart, so you can believe everything that I say. In the absence of a source for this information, Pi expects us to just take it on faith that some well-respected economist somewhere, whose name Pi couldn't be bothered to provide, just happens to have published a study, the name of which Pi also couldn't be bothered to provide, that supports Pi's preferred actions. This is sloppy at best and disinformation at worst, and Pi knows it.
And among smaller providers as well, just earlier this week, 22 internet service providers with 1,000 customers or less told us that these Title II regulations have kept them from getting the financing that they need to build out their networks. And as they put it, these net neutrality regulations hang like a black cloud over our businesses. And so what we're trying to do going forward is figure out a way that we can preserve that free and open internet that consumers want and need, and preserve that incentive to invest in the network that will ultimately benefit even more consumers going forward.
Again, citation needed. Who are these small providers? Who publish their complaints? Come on now, Mr. Chairman, you're a lawyer. Would this kind of writing get by in your law classes? I learned in 3rd grade how to cite sources and write a decent bibliography. What's your excuse? Maybe you know you've got no evidence and you're banking on the ignorance of the American people to get by in this instance? Now, in researching this article, I found an op-ed that Pi wrote for the Los Angeles Times on April 26th, and he uses this same black cloud statement almost word for word. But, surprise, surprise, there are no sources marked there either. Well, that's not true. There are sources, but only one of them links to an article relating to the FCC or net neutrality. The rest redirect to stories about basketball stars, owners of basketball teams, or sports news. I dug and dug to find the origin of this black cloud statement, and the only thing that I could find was from his own speech, published on the same day as the LA Times article. But even if he had provided such a source, the overall support for this argument is spotty at best. Nobody is making the argument that he's refuting here. In fact, in contrast to Pi's claim that small companies are struggling under the current net neutrality rules, several small businesses have in fact signed a letter to the chairman that says quite the opposite. It almost seems that small companies don't want to be at the mercy of behemoths like Comcast and GoDaddy, both of which are billion-dollar internet titans with lots of digital muscle they could use to throttle the little guys. Imagine that.
I know there's a whole other group of internet companies, Facebook, Google, Instagram, those types of companies that have said to you, these rules are not a hindrance to us. We have been able to thrive and survive under these rules. Don't change them. What do you say to them when they argue this to you?
Well, 2 different points. First, if you look carefully, a lot of those companies don't say that they like Title II specifically, these particular regulations. What they say is that they care about the principles of a free and open internet.
Actually, we see their support of Title II in their statement about the 4 principles they want upheld after the dust is settled. The Internet Association says that there are 4 key net neutrality principles it wants to see maintained no matter what. no paid fast lanes, no unreasonable interconnect fees, rules that apply to both wireless and wired internet, and having the FCC be capable of enforcing the rules. That implies that the Internet Association and those it represents do in fact want the Internet classified under Title II, because that's the only way for the FCC to retain the authority to enforce the previous three principles through existing law. The lengths that Pi is having to go to give the illusion of legal support for his proposal is stunning.
I actually think there's a decent amount of common ground there, and it's just a matter of finding the appropriate legal framework to reach that common ground. But
you mean legal framework like Title II? That thing that you're trying to destroy?
the second point I would make is that these companies are the best evidence of the success of the light touch regulatory framework that originated in the Clinton administration, and that's something that I favor. From the dawn of the commercial internet in the 1990s until 2015, we had light touch regulation, where the agency, where the country monitored the market, let it develop organically, and then took targeted action if necessary, if there was an example of anti-competitive conduct. And it's under that light touch framework that the companies like Google, like Facebook, like Netflix were able to become globally known names. And that's the kind of success that we want to promote in the future with light touch regulation.
That sounds great until you realize that the internet was taking its baby steps back in the 1990s. Internet in those days was far less common than it is today, and it was provided through a telecommunications provider that was already regulated under Title II. During that period of growth that Pi is talking about, the largest internet providers fell under Title II jurisdiction, and everything was just fine.
One of the issues here is whether or not we treat broadband like a utility. And if it's treated like a utility, the requirement is that you, as the provider, are not allowed to put your finger on the scale and slow one person down or speed somebody else up. And I just want to pose a hypothetical to you.
Sure.
Let's just say Comcast created a new TV series, and it just so happened that that competed with a Netflix series very similarly. If these rules go away, how is there not an incredible incentive for Comcast to slow Netflix down coming into my house and make their video, the Comcast video, very robust?
So under that hypothetical, one of the things that's important to remember is that it is a hypothetical, that we don't see evidence of that happening in the marketplace on a widespread level.
Everything that guy just says is bullshit. Thank you.
Okay. I get the feeling that he's trying to be clever here, but it just comes off as condescending. Plus, this is the most fallacious statement that he's made in this interview so far, and the interviewer points that out to him.
There have been some examples of ISPs blocking certain things. The Google Wallet was blocked, Skype was blocked, one Canadian telecom blocked pro-labor sites. I mean, it's not like this doesn't happen.
Well, there are isolated cases, but if you look at the FCC's own record, there are only scattered anecdotes to support this.
False. Blatantly, demonstrably false. Also, considering that most Americans don't have more than one option in choosing a service provider, scattered anecdotes could be indicative of major problems for all of us in the absence of Title II protection.
And the argument I've made is that in order to justify preemptive regulation of all 4,462 internet service providers, you should have pretty concrete evidence of an overwhelming market failure.
And I would argue that in order to justify deregulation of the gatekeepers of the internet, some of whom have both incentive and a propensity for stifling web traffic, you should have pretty concrete evidence that that regulation is strangling the free and open internet to death. And you have no such evidence.
But secondly, the other argument I would make is that the hypothetical is a classic question of competition and consumer protection law.
Competition and consumer protection law have no basis without the Title II classification. Pi is trying to assert that the FCC has no authority to regulate net neutrality, and that such should be left to the FTC. But the FTC has no authority over broadband at all, and this would leave the only oversight and policing in the hands of internet service providers themselves.
So you would feel comfortable telling consumers you can trust the Comcasts, the AT&Ts, the Verizons to not do that, to not put their finger on the scale and promote their stuff at the expense of someone else's?
Not at all. I would say as a government regulator that we don't put faith in any single particular sector of the economy or particular company. We put our faith in the rule of law. We put our faith in the rule of law. We put our faith in the rule of law. We put our faith in the rule of law.
We put our faith in the rule of law. Yeah, that rings a little hollow coming from the guy who's going after that law with a sledgehammer.
And the rule of law, which includes antitrust law and consumer protection law, is faithfully administered by the federal government agencies and state agencies that are charged with executing that law.
Again, what he's advocating for would leave the FCC, FTC, and other state and federal regulatory bodies toothless to punish any misconduct on the part of service providers. And Pi knows this. Things being what they are. Without other protections in place, reclassifying the internet under Title I is like hopping off of a diving board into a swimming pool that has no water in it. Anyway, that's the meat and potatoes of this interview. Now I want to talk about why I think Pi's doing this. If the Title II classification stands, then the FCC keeps the power it already has to prevent the throttling of internet traffic and to punish its instances of it, and life goes on as normal. If the Title II classification doesn't stand, then neither the FCC nor the FTC has the authority to prevent or punish the throttling of internet traffic, and we are at the mercy of the service providers. But the latter action does nothing to advance direct government power. So who benefits if Pi has his way? Well, firstly, large, well-established ISPs. Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, but also web domain services like GoDaddy. They gain the freedom to fast-track their own content or charge content companies like Netflix or Hulu for the privilege of using those fast lanes, which results in higher prices for the end customers. Under this new system, smaller content websites and social media startups might be choked out, either by slower connections or an inability to pay for fast lane access. And even some of the most prolific independent creators among us would not be safe. The second beneficiary of the repeal of Title II is Pi himself. He has slid between private and public sector telecommunications law for years. He knows how the industry works from multiple angles, and he knows which strings to pull. If he gets his way, then no matter what happens during the rest of his 5-year term, even if he gets fired from his position as FCC chairman, he can return to the private sector as a hero, whose service to the industry will no doubt be rewarded handsomely. Now, the FCC voted 2-1 to consider repealing the Title II protections, but we have about 3 months until that final vote, and in that time, they aren't getting a second of silence out of me. I urge all of you to visit the link on screen and leave a polite, cordial comment for the FCC. Please, stay on topic and address net neutrality and its importance to you, and don't attack Pi personally. Every ad hominem comment the FCC receives is one more excuse for them and the mainstream media to dismiss the legitimate concerns about the future of the freedom of the internet. If you're introverted or you're not good with words, or you're just having trouble deciding what to say, use this template. My name is your name here, and I specifically support strong net neutrality backed by Title II oversight of ISPs. Then, write, email, or call your Congress beasts and tell them the same thing. This is a serious issue, and if we let the FCC open this Pandora's box, we might never get it shut again.